All right, so thank you. So I'm Anthony, founder and CEO at SeedLegals, and like most people on the call, are founder of a business, and of course you have a busy marketing team looking to get LinkedIn contacts. They're scraping websites, maybe you're doing events, and the event organizer sends you the email list of the participants. And now, which things can you reasonably use? People have signed up on your website for your services. Can you reach out to them? If they've given you their phone number so you can contact them for support, can you start sending them text messages? And so all of these things you're thinking, what can I do? What can I not do? And then one day, while you're happily running your business, someone writes to you going, oh, well, there's a GDPR takedown request. Please delete all my data. So here in a few minutes, we're going to cover all of these items and any things that you think about that you've got a customer writing to you, or you wondering, can my sales team or marketing team reasonably do that? Please pop it in the chat. We're going to go through a set of questions first, and then we're going to get to your questions afterwards. And if they're pertinent to the topic we're covering, we'll do that interactively. So my first question, we'll start with the easy one because the answer's possibly clear, which is I'm sure I certainly get many incoming emails from people offering to sell us email mailing lists for some event. So there's some London startup event or whatever, and it's like, we've got the total list of attendees at Startup Grind or some event at the Excel. Can you buy such an email list? Can you use it? It sounds a bit dodgy, but it's always tempting. I've never actually done it, but what would you need to do to assess that it's legit? And can you actually do it, or should you just make the sign of the cross and keep far away and never go near there?
Yeah, you can. It's a legitimate way of getting data. We were talking a little bit about B2B marketing and how it doesn't require consent. So if we're looking at B2B email addresses via that list, we don't have to do the normal checks that we would do about, does this list have consent? Is it being taken legitimately? And all of those sorts of checks that we might do otherwise.
So if it looks like a business email, anthony@seedlegals.com, you can happily contact me with no issues. It's only if it's my Gmail address or Yahoo or whatever, then you should be careful, which is super important for people to know. So I guess also that means if somebody you've emailed you writes back whinging about GDPR, we're going to take you to the Information Commission, and you go, dude, it was your business email. I didn't need any justification. Is that right?
Yeah, so you need your own justification. You need to the GDPR does come into play. You need to make sure that you've got a legitimate interest to contact that person. And your legitimate interest is, I want to do business. So it's a pretty good reason to contact someone. As long as you tell them who you are and where you got their email address from, then you're fine. You're covered. So yeah, absolutely.
Right. Great. That's actually
UK only. Just really quick clarification, because I've seen this go wrong in Germany, where someone thought this applied in Germany, and they sent an email out to about 100 German companies, and they got about 100 complaints the very next day. I briefly covered this earlier, that we're talking here about the UK. The PECR, the rules that govern this are different in different countries, and you have to just double check the country. Germany, for example, require opt-in twice before you can market even B2B. So just be cautious around different countries.
All right, cool. Okay, so my next question is about using information gathered for one purpose for another purpose. So let's say we've got an email newsletter. People sign up to the newsletter. Can we start using the email for other things? And let's assume for this purpose it's a personal email. Can we start emailing them offers, or is it only for the newsletter?
So you'd be relying on consent there to get that. And the thing about consent is it has to be specific, informed, and freely given, but we're not really worried about that at this point. We're talking about kind of being specific and informed. That means they've given specific consent for a specific thing, and they know what that is. So if you are very clear upfront what that includes, and when I say clear, I don't mean hiding it somewhere in a dense privacy notice. I mean, just be clear about it. This is what you're signing up to. You can do everything that you said that you can do. Once you start moving outside of those things, that's when you're on dodgy territory. But also, I mean, Anthony, as we appreciate, we're both in business. There's an element of business as well there, isn't there? If someone has said to you, I would like X, and you start giving them Y, they're not going to be happy anyway. So the law says not to do it, but also I think it's just good practice not to start doing things like that anyway.
I agree. So, I mean, I make sure, at least I hope I make sure, that every correspondent that's not actually a person personally writing to someone always has an unsubscribe link. And I think that's fair game. If you're on someone's mailing list and you can unsubscribe and one click gets you not there anymore, I think
Absolutely.
that's reasonable. I need to do outreach, and I promise I won't email you again if you click this button. Some make it difficult. Probably the most difficult ones are recruiters, that they're not really a subscription. You write to them saying, unsubscribe, please. I always put please in the request if there's no link to unsubscribe. And they go, you're not subscribed. I just want to email you people. It's like, I don't want to hear from you. Please stop it. So I'm wondering, actually, what's
That's a really good point.
Please stop emailing me.
Yeah, so I think you've touched on something really interesting there, and this maybe is half relevant to everyone as founders and half relevant to everyone as just people. When you ask for someone to not email you, really what you should be doing is suppressing that email address. What a lot of people do is delete the email address. Of course, if you're prospecting or buying lists, you're going to find that email address over and over again. And I think that's the mistake a lot of recruiters do, because they do a lot of cold outreach. They buy a lot of lists. They don't suppress the people that have said no. They delete them. And of course, then they don't know that they can't email that person. So a top tip is don't just delete everything. If there's things like that, make sure you suppress it. Make sure you keep a record of it, so that you are not contacting that person going forward. And also, if you're just a general person and you want to stop receiving marketing, ask to opt out. Don't ask to be deleted. A common mistake, a lot of people, because obviously we work with businesses who work with consumers, a lot of consumers make the error of saying, remove me from your systems because I don't want to have any marketing from them. And we go back and say, well, actually, we should keep you on our systems to make sure we don't market to you again. So, that's a good point.
All right, which actually takes me to, I'll get to one more question in between, which is, the GDPR rules allow a person to write you and ask what information you have on them. Now, the problem is that's really quite onerous. So, at SeedLegals, people have signed up on our platform. Sometimes they're founders. Sometimes the founder might make a contract for an employee, and then they may have followed us, and then they might be in HubSpot because they've chatted with our team, and then they've subscribed to a newsletter. And there are all these different systems, and it's not like we're a massive company, but anyone's going to have several systems. And then just occasionally, I think we've had like 4 ever, probably 3 of them in the first 2 weeks of GDPR being announced, where some people went, great, I'm just going to write to everybody that I know on the internet and tell them to take down my data. And so when they say, when you get an incoming, firstly, please tell me everything that you've got on me, I have no idea even where to start looking. So, I mean, I know that, you signed up over here and we've probably got an email here. How much effort do you reasonably need to go to for, firstly, the tell me and the information that, you've got on me?
Yeah, so there's good news and bad news. I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is the law's pretty clear on this. There's no real get out. There's no way to say, I don't want to do this. It's too complicated. It's very, very difficult. There is a mechanism, but we're talking, it's very hard to trigger that. It's too difficult to respond. Very hard. And as a start, you're not going to trigger it. Let me put it that way. I have spent literal days in physical archives, and it's still not considered enough to be too onerous. So you're probably not going to trigger that. So the law's pretty there. But I guess there's 2 ways of looking at this. If you're B2B, like you are, you've received 4 over the time, it's onerous, but it's rare. So there's an element of, when it comes in, we'll have to deal with it. And I'll come to a top tip on that at the end, because this is one that a lot of people don't think about. If you're B2C and you get a lot of these, particularly in certain industries, I mean, if you work in healthcare, you're going to get these all the time. You're absolutely going to get these all the time, because you're dealing with things that are really important to people. And when they're really important to people, they're going to want to see things. And that's a kind of example of an industry where we see a lot of this. Prevention is better than cure. Think about your data that's structured. This is a bit of kind of privacy by design, thinking about privacy from the get-go. think about that. If we're storing data in 100 different, do we really need to store it in 100 different systems? Is there a way to centralize? Is there a way to cut down? Do we need all this information about people? That's a really big one. Do we really need to know this? Is that important? And can we just not have this information? That's less to do. And also, one thing, you might receive these from staff. That's a big one, particularly if you let someone go or something. Don't write opinions about people. Opinions count as personal data. Don't say, gosh, James is such a nightmare to work with, because that counts as James's personal data now, and you've got to be very careful. There's no criteria for embarrassment. So think about prevention. But my top tip on this, however, don't confuse access to information as access to documents. So many people think that a subject access request gives people access to the actual thing. Yeah. So if it's an email, I get a copy of the email. That's not what you have. You have the right to access your personal data. If the only personal data in that email is your email address, I can take that email address out and say, here you go, this is your personal data. It's your email address. So there is also an option to extract. And if you want a real life example of this, I don't know anyone here uses someone like Uber or Uber Eats. If you put in a subject access request on their website, you get a spreadsheet of your personal data, and that's it. It just says your name, the trips you took, and your email address and your phone number, and that's it. It doesn't send you a copy of every single document in the company that contains your personal information. So that's one thing to think about.
All right, well, that's great. And I'm actually wondering, when you have, AI-driven systems, because the AI system is going to keep data in a way that makes no sense to humans. So what you're going to get, like megabytes of XML data going, our computer thinks these are your 87 parameters. All right, so that's not going to work. All right, so now the next thing is that somebody writes to you going, please delete all my data. And we've covered this slightly before, but I'm going to put this into two parts.
Yep.
Data processor, and you are the data controller. So, but let's hold on that, and we'll get to that in a second. So, you're the average startup, and just occasionally you get some cranky person that says, delete all my data. So, I put this into sort of three categories. One of them is these are things that we've got. You've created documents, you've done social posts, you've whatever it might be. Number two, and correspondence with us, and we're happy to the extent we can find it to delete it. But now there are two things that are tricky. One, when I email you to say I'm deleting your data, do I have to delete that email as well? Because otherwise I've got the whole thread with everything in it. And the problem is, if I delete that email, then I have no recollection of ever having spoken to you forever. So if you ever get back to me to ask, you haven't satisfied my request, I'll go, who are you? And the second one is exactly as you said. If I remove you from the email unsubscribe or suppression lists in Campaign Monitor or HubSpot or whatever, then all that's going to happen is whatever found your email in the first place is going to find your email again and send it to you. So do I just not delete that, or do I write to the person going, I've deleted your data, but by the way, I'm not going to delete this data, because otherwise we're just going to start emailing you again?
Yeah, I mean, my one bit of advice there, I think definitely, if you're dealing with these every now and again, try and have a conversation with the person. Try and get them on the phone, try and get them on the call, try and see what they actually want. Because actually, like I said so many times, I don't want you to contact me, in which case deletion is the wrong idea for what we covered. And like you said, very quick answer to the other question, which was about do we need to delete the actual email asking for deletion and everything. The deletion is entirely retrospective. So the moment I put in that request is everything before then. Everything subsequent doesn't count. So any further communication we have, it wouldn't count. But also,
that is a genius thing that I totally didn't know, and changes everything. So any thread about you don't need to delete. All right, interesting.
Yeah, it's retrospective, absolutely. So anything up before that second of that email coming in, that's what you delete. Anything after, not at all. But also, so this was I accidentally generated quite a bit of debate on LinkedIn recently when I posted that I think this is a terrible name. It's often called the right to be forgotten. One key thing about this right is it's so weak. When we talk about legal absolutes and things like this. This has no absolute. This is absolutely balanced against all kinds of other laws. It's potentially the weakest law under weakest aspect of the GDPR. I can't delete contract data. I can't delete financial information. I can't delete certain HR information. I can't delete things that I consider that I need to potentially defend legal claims in the future. There's so much that I can't delete. It only applies really kind of blanket yes, delete when you're relying on consent and most of the time in legitimate interest. But any other things, so contracts, legal obligations, like that, you just can't delete it. There's nothing you can do about it. So you actually find that the right to be forgotten is so misleading because you're absolutely not going to forget that person. You're just going to remember them in a slightly different way. Is how I would phrase it.
All right, that is really interesting, and that comes neatly onto the difference between data processor and data
Mhm.
controller.
Yep.
So at SeedLegals, companies sign up on SeedLegals and create contracts. And obviously, if someone writes to us saying, "Please delete my data," the fact that Trust Keith did an employment contract for its employee, there's obviously no way I can delete it because it's not mine to delete. On the
Yep.
other hand, my HubSpot connection with that person or email marketing or whatever, I should delete.
Yep.
So if you just explain to everyone where, and you've covered this slightly, let's deep dive. What would the message be that you might give to the user? So I was actually looking at Trustpilot yesterday for some of my competitors, which I do. I got stuck on this wild goose chase, and there was some competitor that got a 1-star Trustpilot review because it said, I asked them to delete my document, and they said they won't. I think they should probably have responded in a better way to explain why they
Yeah.
couldn't, rather than just go, "We won't." But what would be the reply that you would give? If you tell the user over 300 pages the difference between data control and data processor, that's excessive. But how is the nicest way to go? Sorry, we can't. You need to go and contact these people because it's their document.
Yeah, I think it requires a little bit of emotional letting go from the founder or the people responsible for the processor. As a processor, it's just not your information, not your data. It's not yours at all. You cannot do anything with it. That's the brutal reality. So you're not allowed to do this. You will almost you should whether you do or not, but you should have a contract in place,
That's right.
and that will cover what you can and can't do. In many cases, and it will say you can only act upon the instruction of the data controller. So if that comes in, I think the best thing to do is say, love to help. We can delete things that we are the controller for, which is X, Y, and Z. But where we act as a processor, we are legally not allowed to touch this data. However, it belongs to this, or this company is responsible. It doesn't belong to you, but this company is responsible for the data. We'll have a speak to them, or we can put you in touch, and they can pick it up with you. And then, of course, the reality is, if it's contracts, they're probably not going to be able to delete it anyway, because you legally have to require contracts for 6 years or so under the Limitations Act. So, realistically, it's not going to happen anyway. But yeah, absolutely. If you're a processor, it's not your data. You can't make any decisions about it. And the trap to avoid falling into: the moment you make a decision about the data, you become a controller of that data, and all the obligations of being a controller come into play. So the privacy notice and XYZ, that suddenly becomes a big obligation. So just be cautious of that.
All right, thank you. So in a few moments, we're going to switch tacks to GDPR, the privacy policies and other things. But before we're going to go through the Q&A. So firstly, anyone with a question, pop it in the chat. And while you do, we'll go through the ones already posted. So firstly, question from Hugo. If a company's asked to delete customer info, can we keep it in a blacklist? And I think we've covered that, is that you want to delete the info that you can, and you want to keep the ones to say we won't unsubscribe, send you emails again. I think, by the way, one of the interesting things is, as a person, and I haven't asked any company because I know it's onerous. I've never written to a company saying,
Yeah.
tell me the data you've got, or remove me, because you're a pain when you do that. But sometimes you just want some information, and I think the problem is, as you've alluded to earlier, there is a person who would like you to tell them something, they probably
Mhm.
realize they can't write to you and say, can you just tell me, the recent medical record you've got, because the provider will probably say no. So they invoke the Death Star provisions of,
Yeah.
put in GDPR, and then suddenly it goes from, oh, great, I'll just tell you this, which we've got for you. We've
Yeah.
got you in HubSpot, we've got you here, to the fact that they thought they had to ask it in a particular way. So maybe, and here I look to your advice, is it worthwhile writing back to go, you've mentioned the GDPR forgot provision or whatever it is. Can you tell me, which of these three things you really want? Which is one, just give me a quick snapshot of the things you tell about me, or you want a particular document which you'd like to do, or two or three, do you want us to really delete everything?
Mm. It's a really tricky one because time is of the essence here. If you start delaying all the requests, I guarantee that's going to be picked up by the information commissioner, and they're not going to be happy with you. So if it becomes almost a tactic to push back, it enters very grey terms. I think if you're getting loads of these, that's impractical, and I think that you're going to potentially veer into the territory of actually blocking. And I think there's going to be an element of kind of accepting that some people don't know what they're doing, but they are legally capable human beings that are allowed to make their own decisions. So if they want us to delete it, we'll delete it. But if you're getting a few here and there, or someone's unhappy, or it's part of a complaint or something, don't be afraid of just because Article 15 is in the email, or just because they say GDPR or anything. If you can pick up the phone and have a conversation with someone, then do. I used to work in a place that had the resources to do this for over 5,000 requests per year, and we used to do that. And in so many cases, it would be, I was not happy about this one specific thing. So if we go back to that subject access request earlier, like you allude to, they might they don't want 20 years worth of data. They want data relating to this certain incident that they're not happy about. That might be the case. So you can get that clarification. Just make sure you're not kind of desperately holding up the process every time, because then you're in slightly dodgy territory there.
All right. My wry smile as you were talking is when you said, we'll phone them. So it's like, you've got, please delete my email data. I'll just call you. Don't worry, I've got your number as well. So,
Yeah.
all right. So now we've got two great questions from Anushka and from Vasily, which is, what is if their personal email is their business email? And if you do LinkedIn, mining, you're likely to get personal emails, but probably in a business context. So how do you tell, or is it just taken at, the assumption is if it's a Gmail email, it is their personal one? Discuss.
Yeah. I tend to shy away from saying what you can and can't do, full stop. What I would say is, you are taking a massive risk if you choose to treat that as a B2B conversation. Even if someone says that as their business email, it's clearly not. It's clearly a personal email. You are taking a huge risk there, because it's likely that is their personal email. It's likely that's where they have their Deliveroo and Netflix accounts and stuff like that. They necessarily going to want you to be reaching out about potential investment in the company. They're going to like, leave me alone, I'm at home with my wife and kids. So be very, very, very careful. As far as the law is concerned, I would treat that as a personal email address and stay away. If you're getting your email address from LinkedIn, I mean, message them on LinkedIn. Don't message them on their email address, would be my advice. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So, and so messaging on LinkedIn is fair game, presumably.
It's a very grey area, actually. I think the data protection community is pretty split on this. I think arguably it's electronic marketing, and so you possibly need consent in quite a lot of areas. But I would say, look, don't even worry about that. No one cares. Realistically, no one cares. No, the ICO has never pulled up someone for messaging someone on LinkedIn. Go ahead, everyone does it. It's an accepted
exactly practice. From the number of incomings you get.
That's where the theory of the law doesn't quite match the reality. And I think the reality is, message someone on LinkedIn, you're going to get away with it completely.
All right. So now, thank you. So now a question from Emma, which is, could you elaborate on soft opt-in to finding new contacts and where you can use this for existing clients?
Yeah, we dug into this one. This one came in quite early on. So we dug into this one around the kind of when a soft opt-in applies. And so yeah, I think we've probably covered that. I went into a fair amount of
Okay,
detail there because it's a very interesting area of the law. Use it is my advice. It unlocks so much revenue for you. It's out there. It's available. You're probably sitting on a treasure trove that you're not using if you're not using the soft opt-in. So do
right.
use it.
Okay, all right. So thank you. So now we're going to switch tack from,
Hmm.
I'm a founder with customers who are
Yeah.
going to write to me periodically through to I'm a founder and I want to do a partnership with a large enterprise, and the
Mm.
large enterprise is going to have some set of requirements. Some of them are, GDPR related. Some of them are cybersecurity related, and so on. So which things do I need to have in place as policies or other, so that when I want to do a deal with a bank or insurance company or something like that, and they go, send us your policy, and you pick yourself up from the floor, rolling with laughter and going, policy, what policy? You do some urgent Googling of policies. And maybe this is exactly when you go to trust Keith if you haven't already before, but over to you.
So you might get lucky and you might not. There will be certain companies that will not back down. I want to see that you have this policy, this policy, this policy, this policy, this level of encryption, this detail here, this detail there, and full stop. There's nothing you can do. Um, Unfortunately, that's reality. There will be those companies that don't back down. They will insist you answer 100. I mean, we helped I think it was a 10-person company answer 187 questions about security alone. That wasn't even about their finance and anything. It was purely security. They wouldn't back down. It had to be done on their platform. It had to be done. In those situations, I think unfortunately you're probably going to have to pull together those policies in some way, and it will be a business decision. Do we proceed with this deal on this
Right.
basis? Do we invest in doing this because the deal is worth a lot of money, or we say, okay, now's not the time for enterprise deals. We'll mature and then come back to it, because you're entering a much more mature market. I think there is an element of, realistically, we have to be aware of that. We're playing with much bigger, much more powerful, but also much more mature businesses who will have much bigger expectations and have the power to go, okay, we won't work with you, we'll work with someone else.
And who have jobs bodies who've got nothing else to do than to write those
Absolutely.
policies where you've actually got a business to run. So yeah,
Absolutely. And there's a massive power imbalance. And unfortunately, that's the way of the world. However, there are some companies, and there definitely are some big ones out there that will accept the conversation, will accept a position. Particularly investors, I would say. Investors sometimes give quite onerous data protection expectations, and then will agree to a plan or okay, we don't have all these things in place, but okay, we've got a 100-day plan. I think three of the companies we're working with have come to us with a 100-day plan from investors who got the investment even though they didn't have that much in place, as long as they agreed to put it in place. And that can be the case for some enterprise customers as well. One very quick thing I would say, I mean, make sure you've got the basics, make sure you've got the stuff you
and
legally have
is
to
is
have.
there is there anywhere where people can go for these basics? Is that something that Trust Keith offers? Can you do some Googling? I mean, we'd like to, maybe this is a prompt to offer some more of these on SeedLegals, so to the extent that they're fairly standardized, we've got a privacy policy and
Yep.
a couple of other things, but maybe there is a suite of things that
Mhm.
would be an interesting set of things that most people could use, assuming they're suitably standardized.
Of course, the businessman in me says, yes, Trust Keith, come to Trust Keith. But I have to be completely honest. The ICO's website, Information Commissioner's Office website, often has these templates on there.
Right. Okay.
They have a lot of the basics on there. So obviously, if you can't work it out or you're stuck, you're gonna reach out for support. But in terms of the a lot of the templates, you can find them on the ICO's website. So that is the first place that they've got a small and medium enterprise hub. As well, that will contain a lot of these templates and things. So they are out there, they are online, because it's not this is not sensitive IP. This is the law. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's publicly available. So you can find it if you look for it
All right. Well,
out there.
That's great. So, I mean, if you can get the template, that's awesome. Of course, there is a small side effect is if you then publish that as your policy, you actually have to do the stuff in it, which
Absolutely,
might be
absolutely.
more onerous.
Yeah.
Okay, and by the way, as a founder, I think we've constructed our business to be B2C. I mean, our
Mm.
customers are startups, so they're businesses, but it's as if it's B2C. Um,
Yeah.
and the problem with B2B is that there are immensely long sales cycles, and you also, as a small startup, often a big mismatch for the bank and so on. And I've certainly walked away from a major partnership after we got the security and the other policies. Like, dude, it's just insane. It's just not worth my time trying to do it. So walking away is painful, but often it's, I think, the better thing to do.
Absolutely.
Um,
I agree.
when, uh,
It's the
when
reality.
and when it is an investor who's asking for these, then it's a much easier conversation because you go, would you prefer that I use your money to hire iOS developers to make an app for millions of users, or that I spend it on GDPR compliance and
Yeah.
don't spend it on developing and get more users? And then they'll probably go, spend it on the users first. And then
Mm.
when you get there, let's work on the next step. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the last question that we have here is, any tips for completing those questionnaires? I think we um, have covered that, but maybe the problem is you want to deal with a bank or insurance company, and you get this giant questionnaire, and your first thought is, I'm just never going to work with them. Then you go through the anger denial acceptance curve,
Yeah.
and how can you sort of figure out the reason they came up with this? Is it something they're genuinely interested? Is it something they just need to tick a box? And then also
No,
how
so
set
on
they
this
are on that.
on
Yeah,
this point, they're not just evil bureaucrats determined to ruin you and make you do lots of work just for the sake of it. Quite often they will have contractual requirements that companies they work with meet their level of compliance. Don't forget they will have investors, they will have shareholders, they will have requirements as well. And it's not the case that they're just doing this for the sake of it. They might have a contract with another even bigger enterprise that says that companies they work with must be as equally secure as that company. So and quite often these companies are certified with ISO 27001. One of the big aspects of ISO 27001 is your supply chain risk and that security. And effectively, it means that a lot of your partners have to essentially meet the standards of ISO 27001 in order for them to be considered a safe partner. So it can be easy to be downtrodden and frustrated by this, but I think also you have to put yourselves in the shoes of those companies. They have their own contractual commitments, they have their own shareholders, they have their own investors that have their own requirements as well. So that can often be the case, which is why it's always worth a conversation. Always worth a
right.
conversation. If they say absolutely not, you have to fill in a questionnaire, well, so be it. But sometimes they will say, well, if you had at least this and this, we'd probably approve it. So have a conversation if you can.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I think the one item you mentioned earlier, which is interesting, which is, never put in an email or, I guess, Slack thread and so on, anything that you don't want to be disclosed publicly
Yeah.
later. Many, many years ago, I used to work with Kazaa and the music file sharing, and it was sued, and all my emails had to be discovered, and some of them were read out in court. There were no cranky ones where I said so and so was an asshole, fortunately, but some of them was like, I wish I hadn't said that. So
Yeah.
rule one is never write something down or put something in a
Absolutely.
way it can be recorded if you don't want it to be outed later, and that's a really good starting point.
Remote work has made quite a few people forget that you can pick up a phone. Pick up a
Right,
phone if you want to say anything controversial. I had the best training in this because I used to work in the public sector where everything was subject to the Freedom of Information Act. The amount of phone calls I've had with people where I said, "For God's sake, don't send that email. Don't write
right,
that down. Please don't do that." It applies everywhere. Have a conversation first, or find a different medium in which to share it. As soon as you write it down, it's on record. And like you say, it's not just GDPR. You could be sued. You could be having these things in court. There are other means where this can be a problem.
All right. So if there are any other questions, pop them in now before we wrap up. And I've covered the things that I wanted to go through. This has been really helpful. When I was telling my wife I'm going to do a session on GDPR, she went, "Oh my God, that's so boring." But actually, it's super interesting because it's exactly the problem that every startup founder has. And once you understand the way it works, the challenge you have is that you run your business, and then one day somebody writes to you with a GDPR request, and because it's the very first one you've received, you've read there's dire warnings from the ICO and so on, and so there's mass panic. And so the first one is like panic, then the next one's like, okay, it was a pain to manually do these things, to find the emails and so on. And at this point, you're thinking, if I'm getting one of these a week, then I'm going to have to automate all of this. If I'm getting one of these a year, we don't need to panic, but we'll just have to spend some hours trawling through stuff. And then you're going to sort of take a data-driven approach. And at SeedLegals, I think I've got like a grand total of like 4 ever, of which 3 were in the first week of GDPR. So it's like, great, that's a non-issue. And then you also do some things to minimize that, like all of your emails have got unsubscribe links, and you can click a button somewhere so that you don't email people. I mean, you never know when your marketing team fire up some new initiative and forget that, but that's certainly the goal. All right, now
I guess my one key takeaway
yeah.
from this very quickly is yes, this is the law, and of course there is an element where we say, well, this is just as legally important as complying with financial laws and tax and stuff like that. But also, my key takeaway is do it early and you will reap the rewards later. It's a false economy that we should just leave it until we've got the money, or we should leave it until then. I mean, if you then require more help, it's going to be a bigger proportion of your budget. So it's going to cost you more, and it's going to be a bigger proportion because it's going to be harder to unpick. But also, B, we work with some companies where you think if only 3 years ago you designed this differently, you could sell all this data now. You could make an absolute fortune.
Right.
But now you've got so many loopholes to jump through. There's a company we're working with that honestly has 10 million records that is so valuable to advertisers, super valuable. They've captured it wrong. They can't sell it.
Right.
And I despair because, I work in data protection, but I'm a business person too, right? I understand business. I work in a startup. I think to myself, if only you had captured that slightly differently at the start, you would be making millions from this data now that you're not. So don't leave it too late. Bring it in early because it does have tangible financial benefits later on that you might not be able to see now. But I promise you, the worst news that I have to deliver is
you can't use it. Yeah, you've got a gold
money.
mine. You can't use it.
I hate that. I hate doing that. So yeah.
All right, cool. So now next question from Suzanne, actually in our SeedLegals team, which was exactly the point that mind meeting here is the point that I wanted to make next, which is I've been getting emails from the ICO, the Information Commission Office, saying one of the big dividends of Brexit is we can rid ourselves of those pesky EU data protection laws. We can hopefully ditch the stupid, idiotic, mindless cookie pop-up thing acceptance, which just ruins everyone's web experience. Oh dear, I've just outed myself on that one. And so
I hate it too. I hate it.
And what do you so the question is, what do you think will change in the coming years as a result of Brexit and or other upcoming rules changes?
I used to work with politicians a lot. This has all the hallmarks of we can say that we did something without actually having to do anything.
Marketing spin. All right.
Yeah, I think it's very clear as soon as Brexit happened that the bonfire of any EU terms would happen, right? So it's in the government's interest to say we scrapped GDPR, even if GDPR doesn't really change that much. I've looked through the proposals. Really, any acronyms that we got used to, like ROPA, Records of Processing Activity, has just been given a new name. DPO is now Senior Privacy Manager. It's pretty much the same thing, just different names. So it's a big marketing trick. However, one thing that is absolutely certain is that the ICO is not going to get suddenly much stricter. So it's not suddenly going to be a case where we end up with a very draconian regulator who's going to be fining left, right, and center. The ICO has always been quite laid back when it comes to enforcement. Doesn't look like that's going to change, except for on the very first thing that we covered, marketing. Quite phenomenally, the UK has upping the marketing fines from £500,000 to the same as GDPR, which could be hundreds of millions. So the government has recognized that, yes, we need to do away with some of the cookie stuff and that kind of thing, but also spamming people and spam marketing and those fake phone calls and everything really piss people off. So they are like exponentially increasing the fines there. So that's the only thing I would say actually is getting stricter. We will see fines in the several millions for spam going forward, I think.
Okay. So, by the way, I was greatly amused because when I got the email from the ICO going, "Ta-da, Brexit! These things are changing." The first thought was, "How did you get my email address?" So, but all right. So, last question then, which is from Hugo, saying, "If people ask questions on social media DMs and provide personal details, what responsibilities does an org have to safeguard that doesn't being read by the whole marketing team?" So I guess it depends on if it's in a DM and so on. And I guess also if it is DM'd and someone asks for the information you have on them, how would you ever know that exists in the first place, right? So that's one of those sort of incidentally compartmentalized things.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, my honest answer to this is I would say it's not something that I would lose any sleep over. To be honest, it's data that's been made public by. Well, it's public, I know, but as far as the law is concerned, data has been made public by the data subject. It's. I mean, if you then take that and put that on their profile and stuff like that, that's different. You're now taking ownership and you've got all the responsibilities for it. If it sits in that DM, it's something that they've made and you don't take that and do anything with it, I just wouldn't worry about it. And if they put in a subject access request, a reasonable place to look for their personal information is DMs, and you might say, here's a link to the conversation or something. But I wouldn't necessarily lose sleep over it. It doesn't suddenly make you, because anyone can say anything to you, it doesn't suddenly make you 100% responsible for what anyone says, basically. So
okay, all right.
It's a very minor risk on the grand scheme of things, I would say.
Okay, all right. And I guess going back to then one of the key takeaways of and learnings from me on this call is that if someone says, "Tell me the info you've got," it doesn't mean every document is like, "Here's your name, rank, and serial number," and
it can be. Yeah, it can be. Yeah,
all
absolutely.
Right. Okay. So those have covered all the things that I've had in mind. So Varun says, "How can he reach you, Tom? What's your email? Can he hit you up on LinkedIn?"
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Maybe I'll pop the. I don't have this ready, so bear with me. But I'll put my profile in the chat where you can find me. So yeah, I mean, please do connect on LinkedIn.
Right, okay,
there we go.
And those are all of my questions. Which things have we not covered in the last few minutes? Which things, might you add, or problems that companies might find themselves in, or advice, to wrap up?
Yeah, I think I'd return to what I said, and it's a huge topic, and it's probably worthy of its own, hour to talk about. But just factor this in when you're building. Factor data protection in when you're building, because I say that not as the boring data protection consultant that likes to say, "Oh, you should have done this, this, and this." I say that as a business person. You must think about these things because these can come back to haunt you in ways that you don't expect, and if by then it might be too late. So think about this early. I know it can seem onerous, and I know that a lot of the terms and acronyms and things can seem off-putting and difficult, and that my golden rule of data protection is put yourself in the shoes of the data subject. If it feels weird, if it feels iffy, if it feels a bit controversial, you're probably not allowed to do it, so do something else. Remember, we're all data subjects too, right? So you can always imagine yourself in that stage. If you would be unhappy explaining what you do with personal data to another person, then you shouldn't be doing it. That's a simple.
Which probably starts with texting or phoning, right? So
exactly. Yeah,
All right.
if you were embarrassed by your marketing strategy, then you should find a new marketing strategy. Let's put it that way. Yeah, absolutely. That's the key thing. And the half the battle of data protection is literally just thinking about it. It's not
Yeah.
documents. It's not complex legal terms. It's just thinking about it. So
Right, right. And I must say, it's what seems the sensible is if you wouldn't like to receive such a message, then ideally don't send it. And the one that jumps to mind was the last thing I saw from the ICO having fined a company for sending something like, was it 200,000 or 2 million unsolicited text messages? It's
yeah,
like,
absolutely.
what part of doing that seemed like a good idea at the time? So
It's more
somebody
common sense
decided
than you think. Yeah,
we've found 2 million phone numbers. We're just going to text them and see if there's good business to be had. All right.
absolutely.
So that was a great session. Anything's on your side before we wrap up?
No, I think that's everything. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks everyone who asked questions as well. I really appreciate there's some really interesting questions in there. Remember, I'm really keen to connect with people on LinkedIn. Reach out to me. Likewise, I'm sure with you, Anthony. Thank you for
All right.
coming.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. And in the case of this call, it's SeedLegals. I don't have anything to sell you on data
No,
protection. We've got some free privacy policies, which you'll find in the agreement section. But this, for my part, is not about SeedLegals having anything to sell. It's about informing and mentoring and helping companies and all the things related to growing their business, which I love to do incidentally. So thank you very much, everyone. Sorry I had some issues joining the call, and welcome to Livestorm. And look forward to seeing you on other events and any data protection and other things. Please reach out to Trust Keith, who clearly know their stuff and also know their stuff in a founder-friendly way, which is awesome.